Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a stack of global sources, and they really show us where these big international narratives,
Yeah,
things like security strategy, huge sporting events, even ceasefires, where they crash right into some pretty brutal, often hidden local realities.
exactly. Our mission today is to get past the headlines. We're digging into that critical gap between official policies and what's actually happening on the ground, the messy reality. We've got sources on U.S. defense shifts in East Asia, the really jarring situation around the 2026 World Cup in Mexico, what's happening after the ceasefire in the Middle East, the destruction, the erasure, and some key fights over public health standards back in the UK.
And I think the big question weaving through all this is, what's the real cost? When the
Yes.
global spotlight moves on, but the suffering, the missing people, the homes turned to rubble, the contaminated water that stays the immediate reality for people living through it, let's start unpacking that on the Korean Peninsula.
Okay, so we begin with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's recent trip to South Korea. He toured the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, that 250-kilometer stretch. It's just this stark physical reminder that the Korean War back in the 50s ended with an armistice, not a peace treaty. So technically, North and South Korea are still at war.
Right, and that ongoing tension, that instability, really sets the stage for their big annual meeting, the Security Consultative Meeting. The defense chiefs were focused on, well, the expected things. Joint readiness against North Korea, which is nuclear arm plus missile defense, cybersecurity. But the really big shift, it seems, is about the future role of those U.S. troops stationed there, all 28,500 of them.
That's the core issue. Washington's pushing for more flexibility.
Hmm?
The idea is to change the function of those troops, maybe allow them to operate outside the Korean Peninsula, think broader threats. So potentially, those U.S. personnel could be shifted to help defend Taiwan, or maybe used in operations to contain China's military moves in the South China Sea.
Wow, okay. So how big a deal is this shift in U.S. thinking? And what are the diplomatic risks here? Because telling Seoul these troops aren't just for Korea anymore, that feels like a massive geopolitical signal, doesn't it?
Oh, it's huge. It signals Washington wants to see the Indo-Pacific more as one single fluid area of operations. The diplomatic risk is definitely there. Seoul has historically really resisted changing the role of U.S. troops. They see them as fundamental to their immediate security. But at the same time, South Korea is seriously boosting its own defenses. They've got 450,000 troops, planning their largest budget increase in years for 2026. So they are taking more control, partly because the U.S. has been pushing allies to pay more.
Right, the burden sharing argument. Okay, that focus on urgent defense needs. Let's shift continents to Europe now, to Ukraine. Air defense is still the absolute critical bottleneck there. President Zelensky just confirmed they've received more American Patriot systems. He called them, quite understandably, the most effective weapon against Russian missiles.
And the need is just relentless. Russia's strategy involves these daily barrages. They're hitting energy supplies, trying to deny heat and water as winter bites disrupting industry. And the civilian cost is tragic. Just recently, a drone attack in the Sumy region killed one man, injured 5 members of his family. It's constant.
And the logistics of getting those Patriots there, it's fascinating. It sounds like a complex chess game, like what happened with Germany, right?
That's
Germany
right.
sent systems, but only after getting guarantees the U.S. would backfill their own stocks.
Exactly. It shows how interconnected everything is. A tactical delivery to Kyiv ripples right through NATO inventories and alliance commitments. You have to make sure everyone feels secure while getting Ukraine what it desperately needs now.
Okay, so from that kind of state-level defense crisis, let's pivot. We're moving from facing a foreign military to dealing with internal security against, well, powerful organized crime. We're heading to Mexico, where this massive global spectacle is set to collide pretty violently, it seems, with local reality.
Yeah, this might be the most jarring paradox we look at today. Jalisco State is hosting 4 matches for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, and officials are, busy fine-tuning security for the fans, metal detectors, drone jammers, bomb-sniffing dogs at the stadiums. The whole show.
Okay, standard procedure for a big event.
Got it.
Jalisco is also home base for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, arguably Mexico's most powerful cartel, estimated 19,000 members. And the state leads the country in disappearances, like 1,000 reported missing just up to October, a 30% jump.
Precisely. And you have officials talking up the World Cup's economic benefits, $1 billion in revenue, 7,000 jobs, painting this picture of, safety and opportunity. But then you hear whispers about the actual security strategy. Some officials have sort of downplayed the risks by suggesting there's a a tacit truce in place.
Hold on. A tacit truce? You mean the police hold back on going after the cartel, and in return, the cartel promises not to cause trouble during the games? That doesn't sound like security. That sounds like giving up state control for good PR.
That's exactly the concern. Security analysts are worried the cartel will just use the distraction, the influx of tourists, the global attention, to actually increase their activity. Things like street-level drug dealing, sexual tourism, basically profiting right under the cover of the event.
And the human cost. The people bearing the brunt are groups like the Jalisco Search Warriors, volunteers, often relatives of the missing, like Indira Navarro. They're out there digging in fields, looking for remains, living with death threats, needing round-the-clock protection. While officials are focused on tournament revenue, they feel the World Cup hype is just whitewashing the violence the government can't or won't stop.
Yeah, it's incredibly stark. And that gap, that disconnect between official reassurances and local suffering, it actually links nicely to our next topic, accountability when disaster strikes.
Right, we saw a really high-profile case of that in Spain recently. The regional leader in Valencia, Carlos Mazan, he resigned.
Yeah.
This was a year after those catastrophic floods in October 2024 that killed 229 people.
And the key thing here wasn't just the flood severity. It was about political accountability for communication failure. The public outcry was immense because evacuation warnings came late. Mazan's government sent out phone alerts after the flooding had already begun in some places. That was more than 12 hours after the highest national rain alert was issued.
Yeah, I saw that poll. 71% of residents wanted him gone. It just shows how much people demand timely, effective communication from leaders in a crisis. Fail that basic test, and the political fallout is huge.
And you see that same need for effective local recovery efforts mirrored elsewhere, too. Like in the Caribbean, after Hurricane Melissa hit Jamaica pretty hard, the immediate focus shifted to local recovery, making sure local infrastructure was the priority, not just broad national policies.
Okay, so if accountability for warnings is one theme, let's talk about accountability for agreements, specifically ceasefires. This brings us to our final major tension point, the hidden costs that stick around long after the deal is signed. We're looking at southern Lebanon.
Yeah, the sources here paint a really devastating picture. There was that ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah back in November 2024. But despite that truce, the evidence shows Israel has continued demolishing hundreds of homes, critical civilian infrastructure too, in border villages like Hula.
So how are the residents, the people trying to go back, how are they interpreting this ongoing destruction? What do they think is happening?
They see it as deliberate, an effort to stop them from returning permanently. And, frankly, to erase the history and the viability of these border communities. The scale of destruction documented after the ceasefire is just staggering. Lebanon's National Council for Scientific Research found almost 500 homes destroyed after the truce, just in 3 villages alone.
It sounds incredibly personal, aimed at culture, too. You mentioned Abdulaziz's crime, 74 years old. He didn't just lose his house.
No, he lost his entire library. Over 1,000 books, philosophy, science, history, irreplaceable, gone. And a monument in Hula commemorating a 1948 massacre.
Yeah.
Found desecrated with Hebrew graffiti.
And the story of Hussein Alawiya, the historian, his home occupied, then deliberately blown up before the soldiers left. And even the trailer he set up afterwards was destroyed.
Exactly. When you destroy homes and libraries and monuments, you're attacking cultural memory, not just, potential military sites. It feels intentional in a different way.
Which raises the question about overall compliance with the ceasefire. UN peacekeepers reported a massive imbalance in their July report, didn't they?
They did. They documented 405 Israeli attacks into Lebanon, airstrikes, shelling, shootings compared to just 1 attack from Lebanon into Israel during that period. And the UN Human Rights Office reported at least 103 civilians killed by Israeli attacks in Lebanon since the ceasefire started.
Now, to be fair, what's Israel's official stance on this?
Israel states it doesn't target civilians. Their position is that Hezbollah embeds military assets within populated civilian areas. But for the people trying to return, the undeniable reality on the ground is destroyed homes, cultural sites obliterated long after the fighting officially stopped. The human cost seems to completely overshadow the diplomatic success of the ceasefire itself.
Okay, let's shift focus one last time. Still on hidden costs, but this time in public health regulation in the UK. First, UK water companies being told to reduce forever chemicals, PFAS, in drinking water for millions of people.
Right, and this is a huge challenge. PFAS, these and polyfluoroalkyl substances, they're incredibly persistent, potentially toxic. But the UK guidelines, they aren't legally binding. And the limits they do suggest are currently 2.5 times higher than the legal limits set in the U.S.
So why is getting rid of them so hard?
And controversial. Well, the best tech for it, things like nanofiltration. It's really tough to implement effectively. Nanofiltration basically forces water through these superfine membranes that needs really high pressure, which means massive energy demands. So it's expensive and incredibly energy intensive. Not easy for water companies to just switch on.
Which naturally leads to the fight over who pays, right?
Exactly. David Henderson, the CEO of Water UK, basically voiced the industry view.
Yeah.
The chemical companies who made this stuff should foot the bill estimated at £70 million a year, not the people paying water bills. It's that classic polluter pays versus public burden debate.
And then there's a parallel issue in the medical field involving sonographers,
Yeah.
a push to make sonographer a protected job title.
Yes. Basically, it means needing proper qualifications and mandatory registration to use the title, just like dietitians or radiographers are regulated. This push comes partly because of concerns raised by the CQC, the Care Quality Commission, England's health and social care regulator.
Okay, so what specifically worried the CQC?
They flagged issues with staff training and, crucially, the procedures for escalating unusual findings in some private clinics. Because registration and accreditation are currently voluntary for sonographers, you potentially get variable standards. And in a field dealing with potentially life-changing diagnoses, that variation creates unacceptable risks for patients.
So stepping back and looking at everything we've covered, from, military strategies shifting in Asia right down to invisible chemicals in tap water, there's this deep connecting thread, isn't there? These big global policies and agreements keep slamming into this wall of local pain and real-world cost.
Absolutely. We see governments chasing these high-level objectives, secure the borders, host the big profitable event, sign the ceasefire, set the regulations. But what's the lasting legacy? What good is it, really, if those actions consistently fail to address the fundamental suffering on the ground? Whether that's someone lacking the actual walls for their house anymore, or cartel violence effectively replacing state authority, or the slow, unseen poisoning of the water people drink every day.
It really forces you to rethink what success even means in these contexts. When the news crews leave, when the international summit ends, what are the real victory conditions? Especially for the ordinary people caught right in the middle of these huge high-stakes games. That question, whose victory counts, the global narratives or the local realities, that's definitely something worth exploring further.